I never thought it would come to this. The moment when you realize the life you built, the love you invested, and the promises exchanged have all been crushed under the weight of betrayal. It started, as these things often do, with a suspicion, a small, gnawing doubt that slowly grew into an unbearable certainty. My wife, Lisa, had been distant lately, not in an obvious way that would set off alarms, but in subtle shifts. The way she avoided eye contact during dinner, the new clothes she said were for work, and the sudden late nights at the office. All these little things added up to a growing pit in my stomach. Then, there was the text message. It wasn't meant for me, an accidental slip on her part. "Can't wait to see you tonight, Redheart," it read. My heart stopped as I stared at the words on her phone screen. The name on the message? Ethan. I didn't know an Ethan, but something told me I was about to meet him. I played it cool for a few days, pretending not to notice the lies piling up like snowdrifts in a storm. I didn't confront Lisa immediately. Instead, I started my own quiet investigation. I combed through her emails when she left her laptop open. I checked the call logs on her phone when she was in the shower. And then I found the hotel receipts, one from last week, another from a month ago, both from the same place. A hotel? A place meant for strangers or lovers seeking privacy. My wife, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, was meeting another man there. I didn't sleep that night. My mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? What had I done to deserve this? But anger soon drowned out the pain, and I made a decision. I would confront her. No games, no subtle hints, just the brutal truth. The next morning, as she prepared to leave for work, I told her I had taken the day off. Her eyes darted nervously, and I knew I was on the right track. "Why don't we go to lunch later?" I suggested. "Maybe at that hotel you've been frequenting?" The blood drained from her face. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, but her voice betrayed her guilt. "Don't lie to me, Lisa. I know about Ethan. I know about the hotel." My voice was calm, but inside, I was shaking. For a moment, she didn't deny it. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again, as if she was grasping for an excuse but couldn't find one. "It's not what you think," she finally said. "Then tell me what it is," I demanded. She fell silent, her eyes fixed on the floor. That was the moment I decided to call Ethan myself. I found his number in her messages, and before Lisa could stop me, I dialed it. When he picked up, his voice was smooth, confident, too confident for a man about to face the consequences of his actions. "I know who you are," I said coldly, "and if you think you can mess with my wife and get away with it, you're dead wrong." "Listen, man," Ethan replied, his tone flippant. "This isn't what you think it is." "Then come say that to my face," I challenged. "You know where I live." Lisa tried to grab the phone from my hand, but I shoved her away, my fury boiling over. "You wanted him, Lisa? Fine. Let him deal with this." The call ended, and I stared at her. "I gave you everything," I said, my voice trembling. "You were my whole world. And you threw it away for what? A cheap fling?" She didn't answer. She just stood there, tears streaming down her face, but I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. This was just the beginning. If she thought I would sit back and let her destroy me, she was about to learn a harsh lesson. She would lose everything. Lisa stormed out of the house after my outburst, slamming the door so hard that the walls seemed to shake. I watched her leave, a swirl of emotions tightening my chest: anger, betrayal, sadness, and the gnawing ache of love that hadn't yet died. She didn't offer an apology, an explanation, or even a plea. Just tears and silence. But my mind wasn't on her anymore. It was on Ethan. I didn't expect him to show up. Men like him, homewreckers, cowards, rarely did. But I was ready if he did. I waited by the window, my eyes fixed on the driveway. My hands were trembling with adrenaline, and I couldn't stop pacing. What would I do? What could I do? These questions rattled around my head as the minutes dragged into hours. Then, a sleek black sedan pulled into the driveway. My heart raced. He actually came. Ethan stepped out of the car, looking exactly as I'd imagined. Polished, smug. The kind of man who thought he could take whatever he wanted without consequence. His tailored suit, and confident stride screamed arrogance. I walked to the door, throwing it open before he could knock. "So, you're Ethan," I said, my voice laced with venom. He gave me a cool smile, as if we were meeting for a casual business lunch. "You must be her husband," he said. "I think we should talk." "Talk?" I barked a laugh. "You think there's anything to talk about?" "Yes," he said calmly. "Look, I get it. You're upset, angry, even. But Lisa's unhappy. That's not my fault." His words hit me like a slap. My fists clenched, but I forced myself to stay in control. "Unhappy?" I echoed. "You think that justifies this? You think that makes it okay to sneak around behind my back, to rip apart my family?" Ethan sighed, as if I was the unreasonable one. "She's not sneaking around. She's trying to find something she's been missing for years." I stepped closer, my voice low and threatening. "Let me make this very clear. I don't care what excuses you've made for yourself or her. You've messed with the wrong person. If you ever come near my wife again, I swear—" He raised a hand, cutting me off. "Listen, I didn't come here to fight. I came here to be honest with you. Lisa and I, what we have, it's real. I know this is hard to hear, but she deserves to be with someone who makes her happy." It took every ounce of restraint not to punch him right then and there. "You think you're some kind of savior?" I hissed. "You're nothing but a parasite. And you know what happens to parasites? They get squashed." Ethan's smile faltered for the first time. "I didn't come here to escalate things," he said, his tone softening. "But if you keep threatening me, I'll have no choice but to call the police." "Go ahead," I shot back. "Call them. And while we're at it, why don't we call your wife, too? Or your boss? Let's see how many people in your life think this relationship is a good idea." That rattled him. His confident demeanor cracked, just a little. "This doesn't have to get ugly," he said, but the unease in his voice betrayed him. "Oh, it's already ugly," I snarled. "But you've underestimated me, Ethan. You think you can just waltz in here, destroy my life, and walk away unscathed? You have no idea who you're dealing with." Before he could respond, the sound of a car pulling up interrupted us. I turned to see Lisa's car screeching into the driveway. She stepped out, her face pale and stricken, clearly panicked by whatever scenario she had imagined unfolding between us. "What the hell is going on?" she demanded, hurrying toward us. Her eyes darted between Ethan and me, desperation written all over her face. "Why don't you ask him?" I said coldly, nodding toward Ethan. "He seems to think he can explain everything." Ethan looked at her, his expression softening. "Lisa, Shut up," she snapped, her voice trembling. "This was a mistake. All of it." I raised an eyebrow, surprised by her sudden shift. "A mistake?" I echoed. "You seemed pretty sure of yourself this morning." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. "Not anymore." "I never wanted this to happen," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't know what I was thinking." I shook my head, disgusted. "Don't you dare play the victim now, Lisa. You knew exactly what you were doing. You knew what it would cost. And you didn't care." Ethan reached for her arm, but she pulled away. "Don't," she said sharply. "Just go." He hesitated, looking at her with a mix of confusion and hurt. For a moment, I thought he might argue, but then he turned and walked back to his car. Without another word, he got in and drove away. As the sound of his engine faded, Lisa turned to me, her face streaked with tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know I don't deserve it, but I am." I stared at her, the weight of everything crashing down on me. "You're right," I said, my voice cold. "You don't deserve it. And you don't deserve me." Without waiting for her response, I stepped back inside and slammed the door, leaving her standing in the driveway. She wanted to break me, but she had no idea what was coming next. The silence in the house was deafening after I shut the door on Lisa. I leaned against the frame, breathing heavily, my mind racing with a mix of emotions: anger, heartbreak, and the cold determination that had begun to take root. This wasn't going to end with her tears. No, she had made her choices, and now she was going to live with the consequences. I walked into the kitchen, grabbed a glass, and poured myself a stiff drink. The whiskey burned as it slid down my throat, but it steadied my nerves. Lisa had betrayed me, shattered the life we had built, and yet she had the audacity to play the victim. Ethan's smug face flashed in my mind, and I gripped the glass tighter. They thought they could walk away unscathed, but they didn't understand who they were dealing with. I wasn't going to let them destroy me. I was going to take everything from her, the way she had taken everything from me. The first step was to secure my assets. Lisa didn't know it, but I'd always been cautious with our finances. When we got married, I insisted on a prenuptial agreement. At the time, she had rolled her eyes and called me paranoid, but I stood firm. "It's just a precaution," I had said. "It protects both of us." Now, that decision felt like a lifeline. I spent the next few hours gathering paperwork, bank statements, property deeds, and investment records. Our house was in my name, purchased before we were married. Most of the savings and retirement accounts were separate, though I had set up a joint account for household expenses. That was the only thing she could claim, and it wouldn't be enough to keep her afloat for long. By the time I was done, the kitchen table was covered in documents. I sat back and surveyed my work, a grim satisfaction settling over me. She wouldn't see it coming. As I organized the papers into folders, my phone buzzed on the counter. Lisa's name flashed on the screen, but I let it ring. She called again, then sent a flurry of text messages. "We need to talk. Please don't do anything rash. I'm begging you, let me explain." Explain? What could she possibly say to make this right? That she had made a mistake? That she hadn't meant to hurt me? The thought made me laugh bitterly. The damage was done, and no amount of apologies could undo it. I ignored her messages and focused on the next step, exposing the truth. Lisa might have been able to manipulate me, but Ethan's wife deserved to know the kind of man she was married to. I found her name in the messages Lisa had exchanged with Ethan, Michelle, and after a quick online search, I located her Facebook profile. Her page was full of family photos, vacations, holiday gatherings, smiling children. She looked happy. Content. My stomach turned as I thought about the devastation this would bring her, but she deserved to know the truth. I typed out a message, keeping it short and factual. "Hi, Michelle. My name is David, and I'm reaching out to you because I believe we have something in common, our spouses. I recently discovered that my wife, Lisa, has been having an affair with your husband, Ethan. I'm sorry to bring you this news, but I thought you should know. If you want to discuss this further, feel free to call or message me. I've attached proof of their relationship. Sincerely, David." I attached screenshots of the text messages and a copy of the hotel receipt, then hit send. My heart pounded as the message disappeared into the ether, but there was no turning back now. The last piece of the puzzle was Lisa herself. I wasn't going to throw her out immediately. I wanted her to think she still had a chance to fix things. It would give me the time I needed to finalize my plans. But when the moment came, I would make sure she walked away with nothing. No house, no money, no future. Just the consequences of her actions. I was going to turn her world upside down. Later that night, Lisa returned. I heard her car in the driveway, the sound of the door opening and closing, then her hesitant footsteps approaching. She didn't barge in like she had earlier. Instead, she knocked softly on the door. "David," she called, her voice trembling. "Can we talk?" I opened the door and leaned against the frame, keeping my expression neutral. "What do you want?" She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes, clutching her purse like it was the only thing grounding her. "I want to fix this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But please, David, don't give up on us." For a moment, I just stared at her, letting the silence stretch. Then I stepped aside and motioned for her to come in. "We'll talk," I said. "But don't think for a second that this is going to be easy." Her face crumpled with relief, and she nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. As she walked past me, I felt a strange sense of detachment. She had no idea what I had planned. No idea that the life she thought she could salvage was already slipping through her fingers. This was just the beginning. Lisa sat at the kitchen table, her hands folded tightly as though she could hold herself together through sheer force of will. Her eyes darted nervously to the documents spread across the table, and I could see the panic starting to set in. She had no idea what was coming, but she could feel the shift, the quiet before the storm. I sat across from her, nursing a second glass of whiskey, keeping my expression carefully neutral. You said you wanted to fix this, I began, my voice calm but firm. Start talking. She took a shaky breath, her eyes glistening. David, I never wanted to hurt you, she said. I don't even know why I did it. Her voice broke, and she looked down at her hands. I was lonely. I felt unappreciated. The words hit me like a slap. Unappreciated? I repeated, my tone sharp. Do you have any idea how much I've sacrificed for this marriage? How much I've given you? And you repay me by running off to a hotel with some sleazy hotel owner? Lisa flinched, but I didn't let up. You want to talk about being unappreciated? Try being the man who works tirelessly to give you everything, only to find out you've been stabbing him in the back. I know, she whispered. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I love you, David. I made a mistake, and I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. I studied her for a long moment, my anger warring with the flicker of pain I still felt. I had loved this woman once, more than anything, but now, all I saw was betrayal. I don't know if that's possible, I said finally, leaning back in my chair. You've broken something, Lisa. Something that doesn't just get fixed with an apology. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she reached across the table, her hand trembling. Please, she begged, give me a chance. I'll go to counseling. I'll quit my job. I'll cut all contact with Ethan. Just tell me what you need me to do. Her desperation was almost pathetic, and a small, cruel part of me felt satisfaction in seeing her squirm. But this wasn't about revenge. Not yet. This was about setting the stage. I need time, I said, pulling my hand away. Time to think, to decide if there's anything left to salvage. She nodded quickly, her tears flowing freely. Take all the time you need. I'll do anything, David. Anything. I stood, gathering the folders from the table. In the meantime, I said, I want you to move into the guest room. I can't stand the thought of sharing a bed with you right now. Lisa's face crumpled, but she nodded. Okay, she whispered. I understand. I didn't wait for her to say anything else. I turned and walked upstairs, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and triumph. She thought she had a chance to fix this. She thought her tears and promises would be enough to erase what she had done. But she was wrong. The next morning, I called my lawyer. David. He greeted me warmly. What's going on? I need a divorce, I said bluntly. And I need to make sure she walks away with nothing. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I see, he said carefully. Can you give me some background? I filled him in, sparing no detail. The affair, the hotel receipts, the texts, I laid it all out. When I finished, he let out a low whistle. You've got a strong case, he said. The prenuptial agreement is airtight, and with the evidence you've gathered, you'll have no trouble proving infidelity. She won't get a dime beyond what's legally required. Good, I said. Let's get started. Over the next few days, I worked with my lawyer to prepare everything. I transferred money out of our joint account, leaving just enough to cover the basics. I changed the locks on the house and made arrangements to have her things packed and delivered to her mother's house when the time came. Every move was calculated, precise, and deliberate. Meanwhile, I played my part perfectly. I kept my interactions with Lisa civil but distant, giving her just enough hope to keep her off guard. She apologized constantly, her voice trembling with regret every time she spoke to me. It was almost enough to make me feel sorry for her. Almost. But then I'd think about Ethan, about the way she had looked at him, the way she had chosen him over me, and the sympathy would evaporate. On the fourth night after our confrontation, Lisa knocked softly on the guest room door. David, she called. Can we talk? I opened the door, leaning against the frame. What is it? I want to know where we stand, she said, wringing her hands nervously. Do you think we have a chance? I studied her for a moment, then sighed. I don't know, I said, but I'm willing to try counseling if you are. Her face lit up with cautious hope. Really? She whispered. Really? I said, keeping my expression neutral. But I need you to give me space in the meantime. Of course, she said quickly. Anything you need. She smiled through her tears, and for a brief moment, I felt a pang of guilt, but I pushed it aside. This wasn't about forgiveness or reconciliation. This was about control, about taking back what was mine. The trap was set. All that was left was to spring it. The days that followed felt like a delicate balancing act. Lisa tiptoed around the house, eager to prove she could change, while I meticulously put the final pieces of my plan in place. Her every move reeked of desperation. From the home-cooked meals she prepared to the "I love you" texts she sent throughout the day. I responded to none of it, keeping my demeanor cold and distant, just enough to maintain the illusion that I was considering reconciliation. Behind the scenes, I worked relentlessly. My lawyer expedited the paperwork, ensuring that every legal loophole was closed, every clause of the prenuptial agreement enforced to the letter. By the time we were done, Lisa's financial footing would be non-existent. I also contacted a private investigator. Not because I needed more proof of her infidelity. I had enough to sink her, but because I wanted to know everything. Ethan wasn't just some random guy she'd met by chance. He was the owner of a boutique hotel downtown, someone she had gone out of her way to meet. That level of effort intrigued me, and I wanted answers. A few days later, the investigator delivered his findings. Ethan was exactly the type of man I despised. Arrogant, manipulative, and utterly careless about the lives he destroyed. The report detailed his previous affairs. Lisa was far from his first conquest, and his lavish lifestyle, funded not just by the hotel but also by a trust fund his parents had left him. He had a wife, Michelle, who was blissfully unaware of his extracurricular activities. That wouldn't last long. Armed with the information, I sent Michelle another message. This time, I included the investigator's report and made it clear that I had no intention of keeping her husband's secrets. I didn't hear back immediately, but I knew it was only a matter of time. Meanwhile, Lisa remained oblivious. She spent her days trying to make amends, cleaning the house, cooking dinners, and hovering around me like a moth desperate for light. The contrast between her current behavior and the cold indifference she had shown in the months leading up to the affair was almost laughable. Where had this devotion been when our marriage was intact? One evening, she cornered me in the living room, her eyes filled with hope and fear. "David," she began hesitantly, "I've been thinking about us, about how we can move forward." I raised an eyebrow, silently urging her to continue. "I was wrong," she said, her voice trembling. "So wrong. I took you for granted, and I let myself get caught up in something that never should have happened. But I want to fix this. I want to be the wife you deserve." The audacity of her words nearly made me laugh. She wanted to fix things? After months of lying, after years of eroding the foundation of our marriage, she thought a few pretty words could undo the damage? But I forced myself to remain calm. "Actions speak louder than words, Lisa," I said evenly. "If you want me to believe you're serious, you'll need to prove it." "I will," she promised, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll do anything." Her eagerness to grovel might have been endearing once, but now it was nothing more than a means to an end. I nodded curtly and turned my attention back to the TV, signaling the end of the conversation. As the days passed, I continued to feed her just enough hope to keep her compliant while tightening the noose around her life. I moved funds out of our joint account under the guise of financial restructuring, ensuring that when the divorce was finalized, she would be left with only the bare minimum. I canceled her credit cards, citing fraud concerns, and redirected her mail to her mother's address. Every move was calculated, deliberate, and utterly merciless. Then, the moment I had been waiting for arrived. Michelle called me. Her voice was shaky but determined. "David," she began, "thank you for reaching out. I had no idea about any of this." "I'm sorry you had to find out this way," I said, genuinely meaning it. Whatever pain I was going through, I couldn't imagine how devastating it must have been for her to learn her husband had been living a double life. "He's out of the house," she continued, her tone hardening, "and I'm filing for divorce. But I want to help you. Whatever you need to make sure Lisa and Ethan don't get away with this, I'm in." Her words sparked a grim satisfaction. "Thank you, Michelle. I think we can help each other." We spent the next hour discussing our plans. Michelle provided additional evidence of Ethan's infidelity, while I shared the legal strategies my lawyer had devised. Together, we created a plan that would leave both Ethan and Lisa with nothing but regret. When I hung up the phone, I felt an odd sense of peace. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't consumed by rage or heartbreak. Instead, I was focused, determined. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my life and ensuring they paid for what they had done. Lisa wouldn't see it coming. Neither would Ethan. The doors were closing, and soon, there would be no way out for either of them. Lisa thought the air had cleared between us. She believed the quiet, civil conversations we shared and my willingness to consider counseling were signs of forgiveness. It was almost pitiable how eager she was to cling to hope. But hope was a cruel thing in the wrong hands. The day I delivered the first blow was a sunny Saturday morning. Lisa was in the kitchen, humming softly as she flipped pancakes, an act of domesticity that felt more performative than genuine. I had spent the last few days avoiding her as much as possible, claiming I needed space. Today, though, I was ready to play my next card. "Lisa," I said, walking into the kitchen, "we need to talk." She turned, her face lighting up. "Of course," she said, setting down the spatula. "What's on your mind?" I gestured to the table. "Sit down." The light in her eyes dimmed slightly as she complied, sensing the seriousness in my tone. I sat across from her, placing a folder on the table between us. "What's this?" she asked, her voice cautious. "Divorce papers," I said, watching her expression shift from confusion to horror. "I've decided there's no way to move forward. What you've done is unforgivable, and I want you out of my life." Her mouth opened and closed, as if she were struggling to form words. "David," she finally stammered, "I thought we were working on this. I thought—" "You thought wrong," I interrupted coldly. "This isn't something you can fix, Lisa. You made your choice when you started sneaking off to hotel rooms with Ethan. Now, I'm making mine." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. She reached for the folder, flipping through the pages with trembling hands. As she read the terms, her face turned pale. "You're leaving me with nothing," she whispered, her voice breaking. "That's what happens when you cheat," I said flatly. "You forfeit your right to sympathy, to trust, to everything we built together. The house is mine, the savings are mine, and you're lucky I'm not suing you for emotional damages." "David, please," she pleaded, her tears spilling over. "I know I messed up, but you can't do this to me. I don't have anywhere to go. I don't have anything without you." Her words should have hurt, but they didn't. She wasn't begging out of love or regret. She was begging out of desperation. "That's not my problem," I said, standing. "You should have thought about that before you betrayed me." I left her sobbing at the table, retreating to my office where I could no longer hear her cries. It should have been satisfying, seeing her crumble under the weight of her own choices. But instead, I felt numb. This was only the beginning, and there was still so much more to do. Later that afternoon, I received a text from Michelle. "It's done. Ethan moved into a motel. His accounts are frozen, and the lawyer has everything we need to finalize the divorce. Let me know how your end is going." I replied with a simple thumbs-up emoji. There was no need for words. We both knew the satisfaction of seeing our plans come to fruition. That evening, Lisa cornered me in the living room. Her eyes were swollen and red, and her hands shook as she held the folder. "I can't sign this," she said, her voice trembling. "You're asking me to throw my life away." "No," I said, my tone icy. "You threw your life away the moment you decided to cheat. This is just the paperwork." She sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "I'll do anything," she sobbed. "I'll leave Ethan. I'll quit my job. Don't." I cut her off. "It's too late for promises, Lisa. The damage is done, and I don't want anything from you except your signature." She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "Do you really hate me that much?" I stared at her for a long moment, the weight of her question pressing on me. "No," I said finally. "I don't hate you, but I don't love you anymore either. You killed that the moment you betrayed me." Her sobs grew louder, and I left the room, letting her wallow in the mess she had created. I felt no joy in her pain, no triumph in her downfall. What I felt was far more dangerous, an emptiness that swallowed everything. The next morning, Lisa came to me with the signed papers. She looked defeated, her shoulders slumped and her eyes hollow. "Here," she said, handing them to me. "I guess this is what you wanted." I took the folder, nodding curtly. "You'll have 30 days to move out," I said. "I'll have your things sent to your mother's house." She didn't respond. She just turned and walked away, her movements sluggish and heavy. I watched her go, a mixture of relief and sadness settling over me. This was the end of one chapter, but the beginning of another. I wasn't done yet. Not with her, not with Ethan. There was still one more blow to deliver, and I was going to make sure they felt every ounce of it. Lisa's resignation to her fate wasn't as satisfying as I'd expected. Her hollow compliance didn't erase the betrayal or soothe the ache that lingered in my chest. It didn't extinguish the memories of what we once had. Still, it didn't stop me from moving forward. I had one final act to deliver, and this one wasn't just for me. Ethan needed to face his reckoning too. Michelle and I had stayed in regular contact. After learning of Ethan's past affairs, she had unleashed her own fury, filing for divorce and ensuring his reputation as a family man was shattered among their social circle. But what we both wanted, what we needed, was a public stage to bring their lies and betrayal into the light. Michelle found the perfect opportunity, a high-profile charity gala. It was hosted at Ethan's hotel every year, and it was the crowning jewel of his public persona. Politicians, business leaders, and local media all attended, painting him as the model philanthropist. "We have to be there," Michelle told me over the phone. "If we're going to do this, it has to be big." I hesitated. The idea of a public confrontation was daunting. It wasn't my style. I'd always been a man of quiet, calculated moves. But this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about exposing them for who they truly were. "Let's do it," I agreed. The night of the gala, I dressed in a sharp black suit, my confidence growing as I adjusted my tie in the mirror. This wasn't the act of a broken man. This was the act of someone reclaiming his power. Michelle arrived shortly after, stunning in an emerald green gown that belied the turmoil she had endured. "You ready for this?" she asked as we walked into the hotel lobby. "More than you know," I replied. The ballroom was packed with guests mingling over champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The soft hum of conversation filled the air, punctuated by the occasional burst of laughter. Ethan was easy to spot, surrounded by admirers, his signature charm on full display. Lisa, to my surprise, was nowhere in sight. "Showtime," Michelle said, her voice low. We approached the crowd surrounding Ethan. His smile faltered the moment he saw us, but he quickly recovered, plastering on a mask of casual indifference. "David," he said smoothly, his tone oozing false politeness. "Michelle, didn't expect to see you here." "Oh, we wouldn't miss it," Michelle said, her voice saccharine sweet. "Such a prestigious event, and such a good cause." She leaned in slightly, her smile turning icy. "It's almost as if you're overcompensating for something." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he managed to chuckle. "Always a pleasure, Michelle." I stepped forward, cutting off whatever he was about to say. "Ethan," I said evenly, "how's business?" His smile faltered again. "It's going well," he said, glancing around nervously as more guests began to take notice of the exchange. "Thanks for asking." I let the silence hang, the tension growing as the crowd's curiosity intensified. Finally, I pulled a small stack of papers from my jacket pocket. "I thought you'd want to see this," I said, handing them to him. He hesitated, but with the weight of the room's eyes on him, he had no choice but to accept. As he flipped through the pages, his face turned ashen. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice low but sharp. "Proof," I said simply, "of your affair with my wife, of your lies to Michelle, and of every other indiscretion you thought you'd gotten away with." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Ethan's composure cracked as he looked at me, then at Michelle, who stood beside me with a triumphant smile. "You thought you could hide forever," Michelle said, her voice loud enough for the room to hear. "But the truth has a funny way of coming out." Ethan's gaze darted around the room, his confidence crumbling as the weight of the audience's judgment pressed down on him. "You don't have to do this," he hissed. "No," I said, my voice firm. But I want to. I turned to the crowd, my voice carrying above the din. Ladies and gentlemen, this man, this so-called philanthropist, has built his success on lies and deceit. He betrayed his wife, his family, and everyone who believed in him. Tonight, we're here to make sure the truth comes out. The room fell silent. All eyes were on Ethan, who stood frozen, his face a mask of panic and fury. Enjoy the rest of your evening, I said, stepping back. Michelle and I walked out of the ballroom, leaving him to face the fallout. In the days that followed, the news spread like wildfire. Gossip columns and social media lit up with stories of Ethan's disgrace. His business suffered, his reputation tarnished beyond repair. Lisa, I learned, had quietly left her job, unable to face the scrutiny of her colleagues. She moved back in with her mother, far away from the life she had destroyed. As for me, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. I hadn't just reclaimed my life. I had exposed the truth, ensuring that Lisa and Ethan couldn't simply walk away unscathed. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice, and I had delivered it. With the chaos behind me, I found myself in a strange, uncharted place. The anger that had driven me for weeks began to fade, replaced by a quiet emptiness. Revenge had brought closure, but it hadn't filled the void Lisa's betrayal had left. The house felt cavernous and silent without her, a constant reminder of what I'd lost. But I wasn't broken. I wouldn't let this define me. I started by throwing myself into the small things I'd neglected during the chaos, fixing the squeaky kitchen cabinet, tidying up the overgrown garden, and organizing my office. Each task was a small victory, a step toward reclaiming my space and my identity. I also reconnected with friends I drifted from during my marriage. When I told them what had happened, the support was overwhelming. They rallied around me, inviting me out for beers, game nights, and hikes. Slowly, I began to remember who I was before Lisa had consumed so much of my world. One Saturday morning, I decided to visit a farmer's market downtown. I needed fresh air and something to brighten the house, a splash of color to drive away the lingering shadows. Wandering past stalls of fresh produce and handmade crafts, I spotted a booth selling vibrant, hand-painted pottery. The woman behind the counter caught my eye. Her name tag read Claire, and her warm smile felt like sunlight breaking through the clouds. She was chatting with a customer, her hands dusted with flecks of dried clay. "Looking for something specific?" she asked when it was my turn. "Not really," I said, scanning the display. "Just something to liven up a place that feels a little empty." Her expression softened, and she picked up a small, blue vase. "This one's my favorite. It's simple, but it has character, kind of like a fresh start." I smiled, taking the vase. A fresh start sounds perfect. We talked for a while after that, her laughter weaving through the conversation like music. When I left, the vase wasn't the only thing I carried home. I also had her number. Claire and I started seeing each other casually. There was no rush, no pressure. Just two people getting to know each other over coffee, dinners, and long walks through the park. She was patient with me, sensing the hesitancy I hadn't fully shaken. She never pushed, never pried, and I found myself drawn to her kindness and quiet strength. One evening, I opened up to her about Lisa, about the betrayal, the anger, and the emptiness that followed. I expected her to recoil, but she didn't. Instead, she listened, her hand resting lightly on mine. "You're stronger than you think," she said softly. "What you've been through would break most people. But here you are, rebuilding. That says a lot." Her words stayed with me, a balm for the raw edges of my heart. Months later, I received an unexpected letter. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable, Lisa's. I debated throwing it away, but curiosity won out. Inside was a single page, her words spilling across it in a mix of regret and reflection. She apologized, truly apologized, for the pain she'd caused. She admitted her selfishness, her weaknesses, and how deeply she had underestimated what we had. But she didn't ask for forgiveness or a second chance. Instead, she wished me happiness and peace. Reading the letter, I felt a strange sense of release. Her words didn't undo the damage, but they softened the bitterness I'd held onto. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, feeling lighter than I had in months. Claire and I grew closer, our bond deepening with time. She wasn't just someone who filled the void Lisa had left. She was someone entirely new, someone who challenged me to be better while accepting me as I was. One evening, as we watched the sunset from my porch, she turned to me, her eyes thoughtful. "Do you ever think about what's next?" she asked. "All the time," I admitted. "I just haven't figured it out yet." "Well," she said with a small smile, "when you do, I hope I'm part of it." I ran into Michelle again at a coffee shop. She looked different, stronger, freer, as if she'd shed the weight of her past. We exchanged pleasantries, catching up on the months since the gala. "Do you regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Regret what?" "Exposing them, making it so public." I thought for a moment before shaking my head. No, they needed to face the consequences. But I'm done with it now. It's part of my past, not my future. She smiled, raising her coffee cup in a mock toast. "Here's to moving forward." 1 year to the day after I served Lisa the divorce papers, I stood in my newly remodeled kitchen, the smell of fresh paint and lemon oil filling the air. Claire was in the living room, arranging flowers in the blue vase she'd sold me months ago. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt alive, filled with laughter, warmth, and the quiet hum of possibility. For the first time in a long time, I felt whole. The scars of betrayal never fully fade, but they don't have to define you. I learned that the hard way. Lisa's choices had broken me, but they had also forced me to rebuild, to become stronger, more deliberate, and more open to the possibilities life had to offer. As I stood on the porch with Claire that evening, watching the stars blink into existence, I realized I wasn't looking back anymore. My past had shaped me, but my future was mine to create, and it looked brighter than ever.